having a structured conversation just to find out what that tacit knowledge, that knowledge that people carry around in their heads is all about, and then we can write that down. So I'm going to sort of welcome Rachel and Jess and Roxanne to come onto the screen if they are available, please. And Jess, did you have slides that you wanted to share?
Hi Alison, yes I do. Shall I? I'll put them up now. Hold on,
Yeah,
bear with me.
I'll remove the giraffes, and you can. They just look like they were having a conversation. That's why I quite like them.
I like the giraffes. I like giraffes too. I like that.
Good. I'm glad I'm on point with giraffes. Got the right zoo animal.
Yeah, I like giraffes too.
Just coming now with the slides.
Lovely. Perhaps while you're doing that, Jess, can I kick off with my first question, if that's okay? So I think it'd be just really helpful to find out a bit more about what the Behaviour Change Unit is, what it does, and how you started working there, really.
Yeah, so I must just say that my internet is dipping in and out, so I caught the second half of the question, but if I've not answered it, just let me know. But this whole question, I think, was around where opportunities can possibly lead and you not knowing where they can lead. And for me, this is all it's most clearly summed up for me by actually the way in which we came to be based in the Behaviour Change Unit, which was sort of random. And it's basically that the Embedded Quality Improvement librarian role had been shortlisted for an HSJ Value Award. And as part of that
Roxanne,
process...
I'm really sorry. Can I just pause you a moment?
Yes.
Can I just ask Rachel and Jess just to go on mute for a moment while you're talking? Because we've got a little bit of a background hum. It's gone. So I don't know which one it was coming from, but obviously whoever talks then, we might still get a hum, but it means you can speak clearly, Roxanne. Please carry on.
Right. No problem. So I was just saying that, you know, this statement is really well summed up by the way in which we came to be based in the Behavioural Change Unit, which was that the Embedded Quality Improvement role at Taunton had been shortlisted for an HSD Value Award. As part of that, we'd gone up to London and met a panel of judges, and our work obviously made an impression because almost a year later, one of the judges actually got in touch with Jess and myself and basically said, I've established this COVID-19 Behavioural Change Unit. Can you join us and build the knowledge management function of the unit? And Jess did, and Rachel and I joined her a number of months later. But, you know, this is just something, this email completely came out of the blue, and this opportunity certainly wouldn't have happened if we hadn't gone through that process. So you never know where, you know, an opportunity that you take will lead. And I think this also applies to knowledge mobilization in general, where in reality, you sort of have to make the space for it by seeing the need and then matching it up with a tool. And it's not usually that you specifically get invited to a meeting to talk about knowledge management. I think it's more that sort of opportunistic, spur of the moment type opportunity that you get, that sort of Leslie and Carol both touched on, that can happen. And the same is certainly true for evidence searches, where you see that knowledge gap and you proactively suggest to research it for them. And it's not that, and the reason they haven't asked you to do it and you suggested it isn't because they don't need the information or that it's not important. It's more perhaps that they don't know how to use you yet. So it's sort of for you to teach them. And by building that relationship, you sort of, you know, more on their radar, and it can and can lead to future opportunities.
That's super. Thanks, Roxanne. And it's interesting how that relates back to what Leslie and Carol were sort of saying earlier. It seems to be a bit of a recurring theme, is taking that opportunity. So sort of talking about opportunities, was there anything that surprised you about the work of the unit? You know, maybe what was the biggest challenge of being involved in this work?
Yeah, so something that surprised me, and I don't know if I should say this or not, was just how, even though they were doing such important work at national level, how welcoming and warm they were and down to earth all the members of the Behaviour Change Unit were, and also how receptive they were to all the knowledge mobilization things. So I think that all the educational elements that that we did were really well received and had a good impact. I think something that Jess, myself and Rachel also reflected on was that, or certainly Jess and myself reflected on was, and I think it was Jess's initial observation, was that when she first arrived in the unit, was that the unit felt sort of familiar in a way to working at our quality improvement team. And I think that's because Professor Matthew Cripps, who set up the Behavioural Change Unit, has sort of an improvement ethos that runs through it.
Okay, no, that makes sense. So you felt sort of at home, really, in terms of the sort of terminology that was being used and what you were used to hearing, and that environment, and preparing searches in that way.
I certainly, the searches certainly felt familiar, and I think the whole feel of the unit was something that Jess had observed when she first joined it, and I can echo that as well.
So perhaps moving on to Jess then. So did you have a clear set of objectives of what you were going to deliver, Jess?
Well, I'll move on to the next slide, which might help. So when she says, yeah, sorry. So when I arrived in the Behaviour Change Unit, I had a conversation with Matthew Cripps, who Roxanne has just referred to, and he said to me, "I'd like you to set up the knowledge management pillar." He referred to them as pillars of the unit, and you can see there on the screen that the BCU was made up of 4 initial pillars, with financial sustainability coming in later. And he said to me, you know, set up knowledge management. The previous setup was that he had, so process engineers were doing change and project management, clinical insight with a group of clinical fellows, and a group of behavioural scientists who were obviously advising on the behavioural side of things. And he wanted me to build something to fit in with that. He had clinical fellows conducting, I say very, very loosely, evidence searches. And I said to him, do you have a plan in mind for what it is you want me to do, or do you want me to just run with it? And he said, oh, just run with it. So, and I can, I very clearly remember thinking, oh, right, okay, you know, so that I started from, as Roxanne's alluded to, the background that I'm very familiar with our quality improvement team, in terms of familiarising myself with the people that were in the unit. Certainly, as things progressed, the makeup of the unit and the workflows in the unit changed. Things were constantly evolving. But yeah, I found that background quite reassuring to help establish myself. And I'm just going to see if I had anything else to say to that. Yes, and I'll just touch on as well what I'd said about the clinical fellows conducting evidence searches. And in terms of impact, Matthew actually fed back that he believed us taking the evidence searching away from the clinical fellows freed up 10 to 15% of their time, which then allowed them to use that 10 to 15% of their time more effectively doing clinical insight, you know, the work that they are there to do that we obviously can't do, but that, you know, that they are there to do. So that was a good outcome for us.
So very much a sort of team approach and using everybody's skills to the best effect, really. Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. Okay. And were there any particular really big challenges that you faced, Jess, that you didn't expect at all, or?
Challenges we had, I think for me it was around, I think I need to change the slide. Yeah. So there's one, working across the virtual environment. I went into the London office once, and the rest of the time I was working from home with people I'd never met. So that provided an interesting working dynamic, and contrasted with the fact that I was still doing my work with the trust back home as well. So trying to balance those two things with, you know, going on to site when I was working with the trust, going on to site in an acute trust, and then coming home and working remotely with people I'd never met. But actually, interestingly, I found it when I was in meetings involving, you know, stakeholders and project managers, and people were looking to me to say, Jess, what do you think about X? And then all of a sudden, people were looking at me, and I was thinking, oh, I have to give an answer. Whereas when we discussed this recently, that actually, I think my inclination is maybe to sit quietly in a meeting, and I think that's something that I've learned from now, is to not sit so quietly and actually be more vocal. And not just something that Carol was talking about just now, and just keep reiterating what we can do. And when they ask you for your view, you know, they were trusting what we were giving them, and that gave me confidence in my abilities as well, in to answer questions and to build my skill set as well.
So that's borne up by two of the comments actually we've just received in the chat. So Victoria, who I know works with you in NHS England, NHS Improvement, just, you know, so it's great that your expertise and judgment was trusted, and that you're given the go ahead to apply it, which I think is absolutely right. And Carol said, you know, that being seen as the expert in your field and being asked what you would recommend, she said that that's been new for her in her role, and, you know, maybe that's something we're not particularly used to sort of standing on that stage and taking on that role. So super, thank you. If you were starting out on I'm going to ask each of you in turn this question actually. If you were starting out on a role like this, you know, you're just about to begin, now you're at the other end, what advice would you give to yourself? So I don't know who wants to go first, whether your next slide is you, Jess, perhaps, and then we'll move on to Rachel maybe. So what sort of advice would you give to yourself?
Perhaps for me, I'll speak for me. I won't speak for Rachel and Roxanne.
No.
Is to say that have more faith in your abilities. This is something for me as a personal takeaway, and maybe as a professional takeaway as well, is that and I've been sat listening to the other presentations this morning, and I feel really reassured that I'm in good company, and that I feel that I'm able to contribute in this way, and that what I did for the unit, it just reassures me that I was doing the right thing, hearing what everybody else has been talking about, and just to have more faith in my abilities is something that I've personally struggled with in the past in terms of confidence, and I very much say that I'm just going to keep building on that. Now that I know I can do it, I'm just going to keep building on that, and just remember that whenever you go into a new role, even if it's not this national level, even if it's a team meeting or an exec meeting or something, just to go into it with that confidence. And what you were saying, Alison, someone's comment about being an expert in your field, and just you know what you're talking about. I know what I'm talking about, which is a bit of a revelation to me.
Oh, that's super, Jess. That's really, really lovely to hear, actually. It's really, really positive. May I come to Rachel next and sort of ask the same question, really? So, Rachel, if you were starting out on a role like this, what advice would you give yourself?
There's a couple of things there. Don't go in with a set plan. I think it's very easy to say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but it doesn't work like that. I think none of us really knew what was needed when we started, and the team didn't, as Jess has already said, they didn't have that expectation. They were happy for us to develop it. So very much for me was listening to what was going on, taking part in meetings. We were very fortunate that they did involve us in meetings, and more we encouraged them to include us and embed us in those programmes right from the start, so that we could be very much more proactive in what we provided. And I was brought in as the knowledge manager within our small team. I sort of explored different things, but then quite early on realised that there were two areas where they needed help, because they were forming other projects within NHS England and Improvement. They actually needed knowledge management embedded into their own programmes and the way that they develop their projects. But also, I think they were very keen on using knowledge management as part of their stakeholder events and the events that they were facilitating. So a facilitator role within those, but also perhaps more for me was actually getting them to think about how they could use knowledge management within their processes. So a couple of examples would be built in before action reviews. I started to encourage them to build before action reviews into their projects, and we did one where it actually showed how we could have better understanding of what was going on, because people came at the projects in different ways and had different expectations. But it also highlighted some previous work that had been done that was relevant to that project, which the project lead wasn't aware of at the time. And then also in terms of events, early on they asked me to think about something we could use at a stakeholder event, and I was thinking actually I think Peer Assist would work there, but actually being part of that programme and being part of the project board group and listening to the conversations, in the end I felt that actually a fishbowl exercise would be much more effective, which is what we went with in the end. I think also be able to clearly articulate what knowledge management or knowledge mobilisation means within the context of where you're working, and have a clear core message. So although we didn't have a plan, we did actually articulate quite visually, and just to put up on there was the one slide that we created very in line with, we used the colours that the postcards have, so that if they came across them elsewhere in their work, they could see that it would be familiar to them, but also then built in some more things into them, built a sort of a spectrum of knowledge into that, so they could understand on the one end it's the very tacit knowledge, and through to the more solid explicit evidence searches, and then also then how that would work within their processes as well. So yes, we built that in to that. We also were fortunate enough to be able to run a lunch and learn early on, so again we could articulate to them what we were talking about, but as part of that we'd also mapped where we thought knowledge management sat within their processes, and at the beginning of that lunch and learn we asked them to plot where they thought knowledge management fitted, and we did that again at the end of our lunch and learn, and it was really reassuring to see that they could see that knowledge management and evidence searches fitted in along the whole of the process, whereas at the beginning they thought it just fitted in at the beginning of the process, but now they could see that it had relevance across the way. And I also started to adapt my language. I realised I was talking more about insights, because insight, behavioural insights, clinical insights were very much their language, so started to try and use their language, so again that it was familiar to them. And the final thing I would say is find ways of identifying how you can you think knowledge management can work. So I've already mentioned the learn, ensuring that we're embedded in their programmes as well, so that we could be more proactive in the work and say, I think this will be a helpful process at this stage. And I also did some find out more about sessions, just 30-minute sessions that I invited the programme teams along to. I put together flashcards, which again you can see are familiar colours, and took them through what the process was, what the tool was, why you would use it, which is the really important thing for me, was why would you use this to get that across to them, and then when and how long it would take, and then the process. I tried to keep them to one page, but actually as I went on, some of them I needed a bit longer because I wanted to look at it in terms of how you do it virtually and also face to face. I then gave them examples of when these had been used previously and how they could use them, and then had in that half hour I had a short discussion with them about, well, what do you think? When do you think you could use this? How do you think you could use this in their work?
Rachel, that's fantastic, and a fantastic set of resources there, and a way to have that engagement. There's some good questions coming through, but I am conscious of time, so I'm just going to move on, if I may, to ask Roxanne the same question, and then we'll almost sort of close this session. So Roxanne, if you were starting out on a role, just in a quick minute, if you may, what advice would you give yourself? I'm sorry to rush you.
That's okay. Be bold, be proactive. Certainly with the unit, being flexible was a really big asset. So that was in terms of flexibility to drop everything, do an urgent search, flexibility to attend a meeting when needed, being flexible about meetings being rescheduled, flexibility in approach. So that was applicable also to the evidence searches we were doing. So you couldn't just go in with a PICO only HJAS mindset. Anyone who's done searches in health improvement topics knows that those types of searches are a completely different kettle of fish. And I would also encourage people to not only think outside the box, but get outside the box. So have that thinking time, but then also action that and do that. And that for me, that's probably most about getting outside of the library bubble and getting into the spheres where the people you're trying to serve are. For us, that's certainly, for Jess and I, that was certainly applicable to the quality improvement role, and of course to this role at the BCU. So that's what I would say in a quick minute, maybe two, sorry.
No, Roxanne, thank you. And I'm just very finally, I'm just going to go back to Rachel, just thinking about our overall theme of the session. If you had to label how you approach this piece of work, thinking about those options we talked about in terms of KM strategy and being able to engage, what term would you use to describe the way you've approached the work?
Sorry, I have to put my screen and microphone. We use a bit of elevative design and with stealth, so a mixture using Chris's cookery, I suppose. Yeah, we used a mixture of the two. I think what we said shows that we had a clearly articulated offer. We wrapped up where we thought it could work, but then we worked in an embedded way and were flexible in terms of listening to what they were doing and seeing how we could do that. There's a couple of quotes up there. The ones in blue are from Matthew Cripps in terms of what we said, and we interviewed him at the end to gather impact. And I very foolishly said towards the end, when he made that comment about how we're not threatening, I said, well, we often say librarians work with stealth, and his response was, oh, that sounds creepy. So rule number one is don't tell the people you're working with you're using stealth.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much, Jess, Roxanne and Rachel. I think we could probably have had a whole hour session just hearing your work and your views. So maybe that's something for the new year we'll maybe think about.